Consider this a bonus review. A review not in the same vein as the Film Review Open Challenge, but still in depth. Die Hard, released in July 1988 in the USA and February 1989 in the UK, has since become a massive hit. It's based on the novel Nothing Lasts Forever by Roderick Thorpe, a crime thriller with a similar premise. To date, there are 5 movies in the Die Hard franchise which are all set at different times of the year, and it's the inspiration for so many action movies that followed it. In this video, I'll be answering the big questions. Does it hold up 30 years later? How bad was Alan Rickman's X-Men? And most importantly, is Die Hard a film I can recommend even now? This review will be a little bit different than others. I'm going to be going through the film's story and commenting as we go, instead of reviewing everything at the end. Without any further ado then, here's my review of Die Hard. The film begins with John McClane, a cop from New York for 11 years, flying into Los Angeles. John hates flying, and his neighbouring passenger suggests that he bunches his bare feet into fists when he gets to where he needs to be. Remember this, it'll be important later. John arrives by limo provided by the Nakatomi Corporation, the company that Holly, his estranged wife, works for. About 6 months ago, she and their 2 kids left New York, leaving John behind so that she could take this huge promotion. John didn't really believe in her, and although happy to see Holly when he arrives at Nakatomi Plaza, he's upset that she's listed as Holly Gennaro, her maiden name. The 2 fight, and Holly goes off to give a speech to her employees, leaving John alone and barefoot in the executive bathroom. I like this side plot line. It shows John as a flawed individual, although Holly isn't entirely blameless here, going by her maiden name. Thankfully, this leads into the plot later on, so I can forgive it for now. In fact, the whole relationship's a little bit weird. John has called to say he's arrived and doesn't have any plans to stay anywhere. Meanwhile, Holly doesn't offer him the spare bedroom until he gets there, so what exactly is the plan for these 2? The building is then taken over by a group of terrorists, most of whom sprechen sie Deutsch. The group is led by Hans Gruber, a recently expelled member of another terrorist group who's well-spoken, well-dressed, and has done his research on his target, Mr. Takagi. Gruber takes Takagi to forcibly access his computer, but when Takagi says he can't do this, Gruber shoots him in the head, clearly not messing around. This whole section sets up Gruber as somebody not to mess with. He's intelligent and has a plan in place. His killing of Takagi solidifies his position as a bad guy without him resorting to shouting or swearing. It's more sinister and methodical, and that can be much more effective. This is also Alan Rickman's first feature film. He was scouted in a Shakespeare play, but his presence on screen makes him look like a veteran. Also, Gruber comes out with a brilliant line that could be used as a parent.
Kids, get down here right now. I'm going to count to 3. There will not be a 4.
John, meanwhile, slipped away whilst the building was being taken over, sneaking to the construction site upstairs. He sets off a fire alarm, which the terrorists quickly neutralize, and then when one of the team are dispatched to kill John, he kills the terrorist and calls for help on his radio. The emergency frequency is picked up by the LAPD, who think it's a hoax despite gunshots being heard in the background. The gunshots are because the terrorists have found John and know he's in the building, causing problems. Why exactly did the LAPD think that gunshots in the background would be a hoax? Is the gun violence in Los Angeles that bad? I suppose that's why the Predator came down and hunted in Los Angeles in Predator 2. Are Die Hard and the Predator in the same universe? Oh, I'd pay to see that movie. John escapes his pursuers and the LAPD sends Sergeant Al Powell to investigate the Nakatomi Plaza. He initially calls it in as a hoax until a dead terrorist that John has just killed lands on his car from the high-rise building. Sergeant Powell is shot at by the terrorists, but manages to escape with nothing more than a cut on his head. Meanwhile, Hans and John are talking to each other on the radio, with Hans calling him a cowboy who's watched too many movies. John keeps his identity to himself, but has learned the names and approximately how many of the group there are based on eavesdropping. This shows John McClane's cunning here, much more than a cop for 11 years. It suggests some sort of military background that's never really alluded to. This and the conversations between John and Hans are entertaining and really show off how polar opposite each are. Hans thinks things out meticulously, and John is very much a person who does things on the fly. John and Al start communicating by radio, with John giving himself the code name Roy. Al recognizes that John, or Roy, let's call him John Roy, is a cop based on what he's saying. As the backup arrives to the cops, Deputy Chief Robinson takes over. He belittles Al for what he's learned so far and tells John Roy to stay out the way. Hans overhears all of this, but is not concerned about the police presence, more about John's, as he keeps killing his crew and has now acquired detonators and a bag of explosive C4. I'm going to stop here to point out two things that bother me. One, after the blood gets cleared off of Al's head, there's no wound. What exactly is in those wipes? Two, I guess I can see where the incompetence of the LAPD comes from. Deputy Chief Robinson doesn't put any stock in the fact that John Roy might actually be helping take out the terrorists. I get that he doesn't want to put a stranger in the firing line, but that's not how it comes across. Robinson outright says that John Roy might be one of the terrorists. To what end exactly when Hans starts communicating with the police? With the arrival of the police, Hans lists demands for freedom fighters around the world to be released, but this is obviously a ruse to us the viewer, as Hans has revealed his real plan, stealing $640 million in bearer bonds. All the times that Hans and his crew have been holding the hostages, one of the crew, Theo, is breaking into the 7 locks guarding the vault, though he says the 7th is unbreakable by him. Hans is confident they'll go through it though. Elsewhere, John, still barefoot and wearing a vest, is watching on as the LAPD start their assault on the building. John tells them not to, as the terrorists are more than a match for the police, but Robinson ignores him and continues the attack. The police are gunned down but not killed, and the armoured car is shot at multiple times with a rocket launcher before John intervenes, blowing the C4 up down the elevator shaft, killing 2 more terrorists on the way. Now, call me ignorant if you want, but storming the building and switching on the lights first when you know the terrorists are armed seems like a really stupid move. Even out of the context of this action movie where disbelief is suspended anyway, isn't this a huge waste of resources, especially the armoured car? John Roy has stated that the terrorists are heavily armed with explosives, and if there is that doubt, why do the police go in with this anyway? I know I really shouldn't think too much about this, but to me, this is the biggest question about Die Hard. There is great debate about Die Hard even today, and so I ask, how fired should Deputy Chief Robinson be after these events? Or at least, shouldn't he be facing some criminal proceedings? Hang on a second. And send. Inside the plaza, one of Holly's co-workers, Ellis, who I can conservatively call a complete cock, tries to side with Hans to get John to give himself up. He gives Hans John's real name and tries to convince him on the radio to give himself up. This fails spectacularly though, as Ellis is shot in the head, and now Hans knows John's name and occupation, as do the police outside and the news crew that's shown up. Cue a background check that we will come back to later. You can blame the cocaine that Ellis is implied to have ingested all you like, but Ellis is a cock. Hans goes to check on his second batch of explosives, which he still doesn't have the triggers for, but is caught by John. As the two haven't seen each other before, Hans puts on an American accent, claims to have gotten away, and John seems to be convinced by this. He gives Hans, or Bill as he claims to be, a handgun, but when Hans tries to shoot John, revealing himself, he realizes that John had a hunch about it and gave him an empty gun. Just as John is about to take advantage though, Hans is backed up by more of his gang. John takes cover, but Hans, remembering that John is barefoot, instructs them to shoot the glass. Here's another time when Rickman and Willis shine. Their chemistry together is fantastic, and they perfectly contrast each other, but work together so well. You can criticize Rickman's accent all you like, but think about it here. He's an English actor, playing a German, putting on an American accent. I can forgive that for not being impeccable. Also, Bruce Willis, as good as he is here, was not the first choice. He wasn't even second, third, or fourth choice. It's amazing how well he fits into this role. John, in escaping with badly cut feet at this point, has also dropped the detonators which Hans is going to use to destroy the roof. This links in perfectly with his plan, as the FBI have arrived to take over outside. The FBI plan to lure the terrorists onto the roof and kill them all by helicopter, with the possibility of killing a couple of hostages. The terrorists plan to blow up the roof, kill all the hostages, and fake their own death, whilst they steal the bearer bonds and escape to a beach, earning 20%. The FBI will also, when cutting the power, deactivate the 7th lock, opening the vault. It's a clever plan on the part of the villains to use the FBI's tactics against them and conceal what they're really doing. It does kind of predicate on the police being called in the first place, though, so if John is the fly in their ointment, then how exactly were they going to alert the police in the first place? The FBI, on the other hand, come across as bigger cocks than Robinson. They're willing to kill 25% of the hostages to make sure they get the terrorists. What kind of backwards logic makes that an okay way of doing things? The FBI agents, Johnson and Johnson, is that an inside joke? Are uncaring and cold, and in some ways just as bad as Hans Gruber and company. Special Agent Johnson is played by Robert Davi, who appears in The Goonies, a review of which you can find in the top right screen right now. That's a cheap plug. I mentioned News Crew earlier. They've tracked down John and Holly's kids and essentially blackmail their way into their house to interview them on live TV. Anything for views, right? Can't say I relate to that myself. The kids are seen by Hans on TV, and thanks to photos on Holly's desk, he realizes that Holly is John's wife. He takes Holly hostage and heads down towards the vault. The hostages are chased back down the stairs by John, who starts firing his gun wildly in the air. The FBI, in their attack helicopter, mistake him for a terrorist. Hans blows up the roof, taking down the helicopter and killing the FBI agents, but John escapes yet again by rappelling down the side of a building using a fire hose. I love the setup for the reveal of John as Holly's wife. Early on, Holly turns down a photo of the entire family when John upsets her, but the individual photos of the kids remain. The fact that even after learning John's name, Hans doesn't put two and two together, because Holly uses her maiden name, is very, very clever writing, and has to be commended. It's little things that happen which seems to have no bearing which come together to make this one scene pivotal, like the TV crew. There seems to be no reason for them to be in the film whatsoever until this very moment. I love it when films do this. By this point, John has 2 bullets left. Hans and 1 goon remain, and Holly is taken hostage. John pretends to surrender by concealing a second gun behind his back when he shoots the final terrorists. Gruber staggers backwards out of a window, grabbing Holly as he falls. John detaches the watch that Hans is holding onto, and Gruber falls to his death. Down on the ground level, John and Holly emerge from what's left of Nakatomi Plaza, where John finally meets Al. Behind him, though, is one of the goons that has survived. He goes to kill John, only for Al to shoot him dead. I haven't mentioned it till now, but Al was demoted to a desk after shooting a teenager who he thought had a real gun. He felt he couldn't draw his weapon again after that, and so it's a feel-good moment for Al to not only draw his gun, but save a lot of people by killing Carl, the terrorist. Argyle, the limo driver, who earlier took out Theo, who doubled up as the getaway driver, takes John and Holly away, but not before Holly can hit the TV news reporter who interviewed their kids. I feel I've been pretty thorough on this review, but before I wrap up, I do have some final thoughts. Die Hard totally holds up 30 odd years later. It's considered the best of the franchise by many, and honestly I can see why. There are a few minor points I picked up on, but all in all, watching Die Hard again was really enjoyable, and I could watch this at any time of the year. Well, I guess that's it then. If you're new to the channel, then feel free to subscribe. Oh, I really should put this on silent. Hello?
Hey Bradley, have you done that Die Hard review yet? Don't forget to mention it is a Christmas movie.
Oh yeah, I nearly forgot. Die Hard is not a Christmas movie. Rather than go into a big tirade as to why it isn't, go back and listen to my very thorough review once again. You'll notice, pun intended, that I don't mention Christmas once until this sentence. I'm going to end it here. Feel free to comment, like, share, all that jazz. Be sure to check out other reviews and fun videos on my channel. And in the meantime though, thank you very much for watching.